There are moments in a mother's life when you stand publicly accused of the worst possible betrayal, exploiting your dead child's memory for personal gain. And the accusation cuts so deep because it touches your own unspoken fears, the voice you've silenced for 18 years that whispers in dark moments. Are you really honoring Carlo, or are you using him to give meaning to your own empty life? My name is Antonia Salzano. I am 54 years old, and I am the mother of Blessed Carlo Acutis, the teenager who died of leukemia on October 12, 2006, at age 15, and was beatified on October 10, 2020. On October 12, 2024, exactly 18 years after Carlo's death, I experienced the most humiliating moment of my life. Dr. Riccardo Martelli, a respected philosophy professor and one of Italy's most prominent atheist intellectuals, confronted me in front of Carlo's tomb in Assisi with a film crew and hundreds of witnesses, systematically dismantling my reputation while accusing me of being a pathetic mother who exploits her own son's death for fame and money. He called my devotion to Carlo's memory documented psychological pathology. He described my life's work, sharing Carlo's story, as commercial, exploitation of a corpse. He suggested my grief had created compensatory delusions that I had built into a lucrative career. And he did all of this while cameras rolled, while pilgrims watched in shock, while I stood there unable to defend myself, tears streaming down my face, feeling every accusation sink into my heart like a knife. For 18 years, I had tried so hard to share Carlo's story with integrity, refusing commercial opportunities, living simply, never accepting payment for speaking about my son. But in that moment, Riccardo's accusations made me question everything. Had I been fooling myself? Was my devotion authentic, or was it pathological grief disguised as faith? Was I honoring Carlo or exploiting him? And then in the middle of that crushing humiliation, something impossible happened. A voice, young, clear, unmistakably Carlo's, echoed through the sanctuary, audible to all hundreds of people present, speaking words that would not only defend me, but expose the hidden wound driving Riccardo's rage and transform the cruelest attack I had ever experienced into the most powerful testimony of Carlo's continuing intercession I had ever witnessed. What happened in the 90 minutes following that supernatural intervention didn't just convert one prominent atheist. It revealed a truth about how God uses even the most vicious attacks to manifest His glory, how the saints defend those who cannot defend themselves, and how the deepest wounds, when exposed and healed, become the most powerful testimonies. This is the story of my worst day as Carlo's mother, and how it became the most dramatic demonstration of his power I have ever witnessed. To understand why Dr. Riccardo Martelli's attack devastated me so completely, you need to understand the fear I had carried silently for 18 years, a fear I had never fully acknowledged even to myself, but which his accusations brought into crushing clarity. I am Carlo Acutis' mother. That identity has defined my life since his death on October 12, 2006. But what does it mean to be the mother of a saint? How do you honor your child's memory without exploiting it? How do you share his story without making it about yourself? How do you know if your devotion is authentic love or disguised selfishness? These questions haunted me quietly throughout 18 years of sharing Carlo's story. And Riccardo's attack transformed those whispered doubts into shouted accusations I could no longer ignore. I was born Antonia Salzano in 1970 in Milan, Italy, to a culturally Catholic but not particularly devout family. I married Andrea Acutis in 1990, and our son Carlo was born on May 3, 1991, in London, where Andrea was working in international finance. We returned to Milan when Carlo was an infant. My own faith journey was deeply influenced, transformed really, by Carlo himself. From his earliest years, he displayed an inexplicable devotion to the Eucharist and a spiritual maturity that certainly didn't come from his nominally Catholic parents. By age 7, he was insisting on attending daily Mass. By age 10, he was spending hours in Eucharistic adoration while also pursuing his passion for computer programming. Carlo's influence awakened my dormant faith. I began studying Catholic theology seriously, attending daily Mass with him, developing a prayer life that had been virtually non-existent during my 20s and early 30s. By the time Carlo was 14, I had become genuinely devout, not just because of intellectual conviction, but because I had witnessed in my son a kind of holiness that was undeniable. When Carlo was diagnosed with acute promyelocytic leukemia in late September 2006, I was devastated. He died on October 12, 2006, after just 2 weeks of illness. He was 15 years old, the same age at which most teenagers are worried about school, friends, and social media. But Carlo faced death with such peace, such joy, such complete trust in God, that even his doctors were moved. His final words were, "I'm happy to die because I've lived my life without wasting even a minute on things that don't please God." After Carlo's death, I struggled with the grief that every parent experiences when losing a child, but I also experienced something else, a growing awareness that Carlo's life had meaning that transcended our family, that his example of combining contemporary teenage culture with profound spirituality could inspire other young people. Within months of his death, I began receiving requests to speak about Carlo at parishes, schools, youth conferences. At first I declined. The grief was too fresh, and I feared that speaking publicly would somehow commercialize or cheapen Carlo's memory. But by 2007, I felt an interior conviction, whether from God, from Carlo's intercession, or from my own maternal desire to ensure his life mattered, that I needed to share his story. So I began accepting invitations to speak, always without payment, always emphasizing Carlo's message, that holiness is possible for ordinary young people, that loving God doesn't require abandoning contemporary culture, that the Eucharist is the center of authentic Christian life. Over the following years, Carlo's influence grew. The website he had created cataloging Eucharistic miracles continued to reach thousands. Stories about his holiness spread through Catholic communities. His tomb in Assisi became a pilgrimage site, and in 2018 the Church officially opened his cause for beatification. Throughout this process, I maintained what I believed was appropriate maternal involvement, responding to inquiries, sharing memories, facilitating the canonical investigation. But I also set strict boundaries: no commercialization, no exploitation, no turning Carlo's memory into personal profit. When Carlo was beatified on October 10, 2020, just 14 years after his death, an extraordinarily rapid recognition, I was grateful, but also increasingly anxious. The attention intensified dramatically. Media requests multiplied. Commercial offers arrived constantly: book deals, documentary proposals, speaking tours with substantial fees. I refused them all. I continued living simply in our family home in Milan. I accepted only travel expenses when speaking about Carlo, never fees. I wanted Carlo's story to remain pure, untainted by financial motivation. But I also felt the weight of being Blessed Carlo Acutis' mother becoming heavier. Every public appearance was scrutinized. Every word I spoke was analyzed. And privately I began wondering, am I doing this for Carlo or for myself? Am I genuinely serving his memory, or am I using it to give myself importance? Would Carlo want me to spend my life talking about him? Or would he want me to live my own life while letting the Church handle his cause? These doubts remained mostly internal, shared only occasionally with my spiritual director, sometimes with my husband Andrea, until September 2024, when Dr. Riccardo Martelli published his devastating article. Doctor, Riccardo Martelli was not a random internet troll or casual skeptic. He was one of Italy's most respected atheist intellectuals, professor of philosophy of religion at the University of Bologna, author of 15 books analyzing religious phenomena from psychological and sociological perspectives, frequent media commentator on church controversies. For 30 years, Riccardo had built his academic career on what he called demystifying clerical manipulation, exposing what he considered false miracles, manufactured saints, and institutional exploitation of human credulity. His work was sophisticated, well-researched, and influential among Italy's secular intellectual class. In September 2024, Riccardo published a lengthy article in a prominent secular journal titled The Fabrication of a Digital Saint: How the Roman Church Created an Icon for the iPhone Generation. The article was a systematic deconstruction of Carlo's cult. On Carlo's holiness. Carlo Acutis was a normal teenager who happened to be interested in computers and happened to be devout. These two characteristics, technology and piety, were strategically combined by church marketing to create a relatable saint for young Catholics raised on social media. But there's nothing in Carlo's biography that demonstrates genuine sanctity beyond what any devout Catholic teenager might display. On the beatification process, the Vatican fast-tracked Carlo's cause with unprecedented speed, 14 years from death to beatification. Why? Because the Church desperately needs young saints to counter declining youth participation. Carlo was manufactured to meet that institutional need, not because his life demonstrated extraordinary holiness. On the miracles. The alleged miracle used for beatification, the healing of a Brazilian boy, can be explained through natural remission of his condition. Medical inexplicability is not the same as divine intervention. It simply means current medicine doesn't understand all the variables involved. These critiques, while painful, were directed at the Church and the beatification process. I could have dismissed them as standard atheist skepticism. But then Riccardo turned his analysis to me personally. Antonia Salzano, the mother who profited from grief. While the institutional church bears primary responsibility for manufacturing Carlo Acutis as a digital saint, special attention must be given to the role of Carlo's mother, Antonia Salzano, who has transformed legitimate maternal grief into a lucrative devotional industry. For 18 years, Signora Salzano has traveled the world as Blessed Carlo's mother, speaking at conferences, appearing in documentaries, participating in pilgrimages. While she claims to accept no payment, she receives travel expenses and honoraria that amount to substantial income. More importantly, she has constructed a public identity entirely dependent on her son's death. Psychological literature documents cases of bereaved parents who develop what clinicians call compensatory grandiosity, transforming their deceased child into someone extraordinary as a defense mechanism against the unbearable randomness of loss. Antonia Salzano exhibits textbook symptoms. She cannot speak about Carlo without emphasizing his holiness. She interprets normal teenage behaviors as mystical experiences, and she has dedicated her entire post-bereavement life to promoting a narrative that gives meaning to her loss. This is not authentic devotion. It is pathological grief disguised as religious mission. And the Church, recognizing the marketing value of a photogenic teenage saint with a grieving mother as spokesperson, has cynically enabled this exploitation. The ultimate victim in this tragedy is Carlo Acutis himself, a normal boy who cannot defend himself against being transformed into a manufactured icon to satisfy his mother's psychological needs and the Church's institutional agenda. When I read those paragraphs, I felt physically sick. I sat at my kitchen table in Milan, alone, reading and rereading Riccardo's analysis, and with each reading, his accusations sank deeper into my consciousness. Was he right? Had I been fooling myself for 18 years? I had refused commercial opportunities, yes. But hadn't I still built my entire identity around being Carlo's mother? I insisted I accepted no fees. But didn't I still benefit from the attention, the recognition, the sense of purpose that came from sharing his story? I thought back over 18 years of activities. Thousands of conversations with pilgrims, hundreds of speaking engagements, countless media interviews. In every single one, I had talked about Carlo. I had shared memories of Carlo. I had emphasized Carlo's holiness. My entire life had become a continuous testimony about my dead son. Was that authentic maternal love and genuine spiritual mission? Or was it, as Ricardo suggested, pathological grief that I had rationalized into religious devotion? For the first time in 18 years, I genuinely questioned whether I should step back completely, whether my involvement in promoting Carlo's cause was healthy or harmful, whether the best thing I could do for Carlo's memory would be to stop talking about him and let the church handle his cause without maternal interference. I discussed this with my spiritual director, Father Marco, who tried to reassure me. Antonia, your devotion to Carlo's memory is authentic. Don't let one critic make you doubt 18 years of faithful service. But I couldn't shake the doubt. Ricardo's article had articulated fears I had suppressed but never fully confronted. In early October 2024, Ricardo announced on his social media that he would be traveling to Assisi on October 12th, the 18th anniversary of Carlo's death, to document in real time the collective hysteria surrounding a teenager who died 2 decades ago. He planned to film pilgrims at Carlo's tomb, conduct interviews, and produce a documentary that would scientifically analyze what he called the Carlo Acutis phenomenon as a case study in religious manipulation and mass delusion. Several Catholic media outlets contacted me asking if I planned to respond to Ricardo's project. I said I would be in Assisi as usual on October 12th, accompanying pilgrims, and that I had no plans to engage with Dr. Martelli directly. But privately, I was dreading the encounter. I knew Ricardo would confront me. I knew he would ask humiliating questions on camera. And I didn't trust myself to respond effectively, because part of me wasn't sure he was wrong. October 12th, 2024, dawned cloudy and cool in Assisi. I had arrived the evening before and stayed in a small hotel near the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore, where Carlo's incorrupt body is displayed. I barely slept, anxiety churning in my stomach, praying for courage to face whatever Ricardo planned. By 9 a.m., hundreds of pilgrims had gathered at the sanctuary, far more than usual, likely because many had heard about Ricardo's planned documentary and came either to support Carlo's cause or out of curiosity about the confrontation. I positioned myself near Carlo's tomb, as I usually did, available to speak with pilgrims, answer questions, and pray with families. The atmosphere was tense. People knew something unusual might happen today. Around 10:30 a.m., Ricardo arrived with a professional film crew. 2 cameras, boom microphone, lighting equipment. He was dressed in an expensive suit, the successful academic intellectual, and moved through the crowd with obvious confidence. He approached me directly, cameras rolling, and without any greeting or introduction, began his interrogation. Signora Salzano, thank you for making yourself available today. I have some questions about your involvement in promoting your son's cult. First question, can you explain how you morally justify profiting from your child's death? I was stunned by the directness and hostility. Professor, I don't profit. Please don't insult our intelligence. You travel the world giving speeches about Carlo. You appear in documentaries. You participate in conferences. Even if you don't accept direct payment, you receive travel expenses, accommodations, and honoraria that amount to substantial income. How much money have you personally received over 18 years from Carlo-related activities? I accept only basic travel expenses when necessary. I have never... How many paid speaking engagements have you done? They're not paid. I refuse fees. But you accept honoraria and suggested donations and love offerings, correct? These are semantic distinctions that don't change the financial reality. You have built a career as Blessed Carlo's mother. Your entire identity, your entire income, your entire purpose depends on continuously promoting your dead son. That's exploitation, Signora, no matter how you rationalize it. Pilgrims around us were watching with a mixture of shock and sympathy. Some were filming on their phones. I felt completely exposed, humiliated, unable to form coherent responses, while Ricardo pressed his attack with prosecutorial precision. He continued. Second question. Can you address the psychological literature on bereaved mothers who develop compensatory delusions about their deceased children? Studies show that parents who lose children often construct elaborate narratives about the child's special qualities as a defense mechanism against unbearable loss. Do you recognize that your insistence on Carlo's holiness fits this pattern exactly? Carlo was holy. Anyone who knew him would describe a normal, devout teenage boy. You have transformed normal religious behavior into mystical experiences. You have interpreted ordinary teenage interests, computers, video games, as evidence of special sanctity because they make Carlo relatable. This is textbook compensatory mythology. You cannot accept that your son was simply a good Catholic boy who died tragically young, so you've built an entire hagiography to make his death meaningful. Tears were streaming down my face now. I wanted to defend Carlo, to defend myself, but every attempt to speak was cut off by another question, another accusation. Third question. Have you considered that the healthiest thing you could do for yourself, for Carlo's memory, for the church, would be to step back completely, to let Carlo rest in peace instead of continuously parading his memory for attention? 18 years, Signora. 18 years of making your dead son the center of your existence. That's not devotion, that's pathology. You don't understand, I managed to say through sobs. I understand grief, Signora. I understand how parents search for meaning after losing children. But I also understand when that search becomes unhealthy obsession. Carlo Acutis was your son, not your career. His death was a tragedy, not an opportunity for you to build a public identity. The most loving thing you could do would be to let him go. And if this channel has been an answer for you, consider leaving a super thanks. This financial help, however small it may seem, sustains this mission and allows us to continue bringing deep and transformative content to more lives that need this word. In that moment, standing there humiliated, accused of exploiting my own son's memory, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses and cameras, I felt something break inside me. All the doubts I had suppressed for 18 years came flooding out. Maybe Ricardo was right. Maybe I had been fooling myself. Maybe the most loving thing I could do would be to stop talking about Carlo and let his memory rest in peace. And then something impossible happened. A voice echoed through the sanctuary. Young, male, crystal clear, speaking Italian with perfect pronunciation, but in a tone that was somehow both contemporary teenage casual and profoundly authoritative. Professor Ricardo, why do you attack my mother when you should be attacking your own unhealed wounds? Everyone froze. Ricardo stopped mid-sentence and looked around confused, trying to locate the source of the voice. His cameramen were equally confused, checking their equipment as if they might have accidentally picked up a radio signal or interference. But the voice continued, and this time I recognized it with absolute certainty. It was Carlo. Not a recording, not an imitation, but unmistakably my son's voice. The voice I had heard every day for 15 years. The voice I hadn't heard in 18 years. the voice that had been silenced by death but was somehow speaking now. Your rage against God didn't begin with intellectual analysis of religious phenomena. It began on March 14th, 1995, when your 8-year-old daughter Maria died of acute lymphoblastic leukemia after 18 months of suffering. You begged God to save her. You promised anything, your career, your life, anything, if God would just let Maria live. And when she died anyway, you decided God either didn't exist or didn't care. So you spent the next 29 years building an intellectual framework to justify the rage and grief you couldn't process. The sanctuary had fallen into absolute silence. Ricardo had gone pale, visibly trembling. The voice, Carlo's voice, continued with gentle but relentless precision. Every book you wrote, every lecture you gave, every article you published attacking religious belief was really an attack on the God you blamed for not saving Maria. You told yourself it was objective academic inquiry, but it was actually a 29-year argument with a God you claimed not to believe in. Ricardo's lips were moving, but no sound came out. Tears were forming in his eyes. Around us, pilgrims were looking around trying to locate the source of the voice, but no physical person was speaking. The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from the air itself. Professor, I need you to know something. Maria is with me right now, in heaven. She's 8 years old eternally, the age you remember her, but with full knowledge and awareness that transcends earthly age. And she wants me to tell you something she has wanted to tell you for 29 years. Papa, I'm okay. I'm happy. Stop suffering for me. Stop being angry at God because of me. I never blamed him for my death, and I don't want you to blame him either. Ricardo collapsed to his knees, a sound escaping his throat that was half sob, half wail, the sound of grief that had been locked away for 3 decades, suddenly breaking free. The voice, Carlo's voice, became even gentler. Maria wants you to know that your guilt is unfounded. You think you failed her because you couldn't save her. But Papa, children aren't supposed to be saved by their parents from death. Death comes to everyone. What children need is to be loved while they live. And you loved Maria perfectly. She has no complaints, no resentment, no feeling of abandonment. She only grieves for you, for the life you've wasted in anger and grief instead of in memory and love. Ricardo was now fully prostrate on the floor, his professional composure completely shattered, weeping with the intensity of someone finally releasing grief that had been compressed and denied for most of his adult life. I stood frozen, witnessing this impossible moment, my son's voice speaking from heaven, defending me in ways I couldn't defend myself, and simultaneously exposing and healing the wound driving my attacker's rage. Carlo continued, "And Professor, I need to address your attack on my mother. Everything you said about her exploiting my memory was projection. You have spent 29 years unable to speak Maria's name without pain, unable to visit her grave, unable to engage with the reality of her life and death in healthy ways. When you see my mother speaking about me with joy, with peace, with genuine devotion, it enrages you because you cannot do the same with Maria. My mother's healing makes your continued woundedness more obvious." The voice paused, then added, "But Maria wants you to know, it's not too late. You can still learn to remember her with love instead of pain. You can still honor her life instead of being consumed by her death. And the first step is accepting the truth you've denied for 29 years, that God didn't kill Maria. Leukemia killed Maria, and God was with her and with you through every moment of her suffering and death." Ricardo was now trying to speak through his sobs. "Maria. Mia piccola Maria, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I failed you. I couldn't save you." "You didn't fail her," Carlo's voice responded firmly. "You were a loving father who had to watch helplessly while disease destroyed your child. That's not failure. That's tragedy. And tragedy is not the same as divine punishment or cosmic injustice. It's simply the reality of living in a fallen world where suffering exists. But suffering doesn't mean God doesn't exist or doesn't care. It means the opposite, that God enters into our suffering with us and transforms it through love. For several more minutes, Carlo's voice continued speaking, not just to Ricardo, but to everyone present in the sanctuary, delivering a message that was somehow both universal and intimately personal. Everyone here has wounds. Everyone here has grief. Everyone here has questioned God, has felt abandoned, has wondered why suffering exists. That's not weakness. That's being human. But the choice is whether you let your wounds make you bitter like Professor Ricardo, or whether you let them make you compassionate like my mother. My mother has spent 18 years sharing my story, not because she's exploiting me, but because my death transformed her understanding of what matters. Before I died, she was nominally Catholic, culturally religious, going through motions. My death and my life awakened her faith, and now she shares that awakened faith with others, not to glorify herself, but to glorify God through my example. Is she perfect? No. Does she sometimes struggle with doubts about whether she's doing the right thing? Yes. Professor Ricardo's article triggered exactly those doubts, which is why his attack was so painful. But her fundamental motivation is authentic. She wants other young people to know that holiness is possible, that loving God doesn't require abandoning contemporary culture, that the Eucharist is real presence that transforms lives. The voice paused, then added with what I can only describe as gentle humor. And for the record, my mother has refused literally millions of euros in commercial opportunities over 18 years. She lives in the same modest apartment she lived in when I was alive. She accepts minimal travel reimbursement when speaking and refuses even suggested honoraria that would be considered normal in any other context. So the accusation that she's profiting from my memory is objectively false. She has actually impoverished herself to serve my cause with integrity. Finally, Carlo's voice addressed Ricardo directly one final time. Professor, you came here today to expose what you thought was religious delusion and maternal pathology. Instead, God allowed me to expose your own delusion, the belief that atheism protected you from pain, when actually it just trapped you in pain. Maria wants you to know, come back to God, not to the institutional church necessarily, not to religious practice you find meaningless, but to the God who loved Maria, who loves you, and who has never stopped pursuing you even through 29 years of your rage against him. And she wants you to know one more thing. She's proud of your intelligence, your academic achievements, your success. But she wants you to use those gifts for healing now instead of for attacking. You have the knowledge, the platform, the credibility to help other grieving parents who have lost children. Maria wants you to become for others what you couldn't find for yourself. Someone who shows that grief and faith can coexist, that losing a child doesn't mean losing God, that tragedy can be transformed into meaning without denying the tragedy's reality. With those final words, the voice ceased. The sanctuary remained in absolute silence for perhaps 30 seconds. That strange, dense silence that follows overwhelming spiritual experience when no one knows what to say or do. Then Ricardo began to speak, still on his knees, addressing no one in particular but everyone present. I heard my daughter's voice, through Carlo. I heard Maria telling me she's okay, she's happy, she's not suffering. I heard her calling me Papa, the way she used to before she got sick. I heard. He couldn't finish. He simply knelt there, weeping, while several pilgrims approached to comfort him. For the next hour, I witnessed something that still seems impossible even now, 15 months later. The complete psychological and spiritual transformation of one of Italy's most prominent atheist intellectuals. Ricardo remained kneeling in front of Carlo's tomb for perhaps 20 minutes, alternating between prayers I couldn't hear and sobs that I could. His film crew had stopped recording. They seemed as shaken as everyone else by what had occurred, uncertain whether they had documented something genuine or whether they were experiencing collective hallucination. Eventually, Ricardo stood and approached me. His face was transformed, the arrogant intellectual confidence replaced by something raw, vulnerable, broken open. "Signora Antonia," he said, his voice hoarse from crying, "I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. I came here today to humiliate you, to expose you as a fraud. Instead, your son, your holy son, who is somehow alive in ways I don't understand, exposed me, exposed my wounds, my grief, my rage disguised as intellectualism. I didn't know what to say. I was still processing what had just happened. Carlo's voice speaking from heaven, defending me in ways I couldn't defend myself, healing my attacker by exposing his deepest wound. I wrote that article about you," Ricardo continued, "because I couldn't bear to see a mother who had found peace after losing a child. My daughter Maria died 29 years ago, and I have never found peace. When I saw you speaking about Carlo with joy, with love, with genuine devotion, instead of the crushing grief I still carry, I hated you for it. I told myself you were deluded, pathological, exploiting your son's memory. But the truth was simpler. You had healed in ways I couldn't heal, and that enraged me." He paused, wiping tears from his face. "But today, Carlo spoke to me. I don't understand how. I don't understand the mechanism, the theology, the metaphysics of what happened. But I heard him. I heard his voice speaking truths about Maria, about my grief, about my anger that no living person could have known. And through Carlo, I heard Maria herself telling me she's okay, she's happy, she wants me to stop suffering for her." Over the following days and weeks, Ricardo underwent what can only be described as complete conversion. He reached out to me several times by phone and email, sharing his process and asking for guidance. 3 days after the incident, he wrote, "Signora Antonia, I have not slept more than 2 hours at a time since October 12th. Every time I close my eyes, I hear Carlo's voice and Maria's message through him. I cannot dismiss this as hallucination. Too many witnesses heard the same voice, saying the same things. I cannot explain it through psychological projection. The content was too specific, too accurate about details of Maria's illness and death that I have never shared publicly. I am forced to conclude that something genuinely supernatural occurred. And if that's true, then everything I have believed for 30 years is wrong." 2 weeks later, he called me. "Antonia, I visited Maria's grave yesterday for the first time in 15 years. I couldn't bear to go before. The pain was too overwhelming. But after what happened at Carlo's tomb, I felt permission. Permission to remember her with love instead of only grief. I spent 3 hours at her grave talking to her, apologizing for the years I wasted in anger, thanking her for the 8 years we had together. And I felt peace, actual peace, for the first time since 1995. 1 month after the incident, Ricardo made a public statement on his social media and through Italian media outlets. "I owe a public apology to Signora Antonia Salzano, to the Catholic Church, and to all believers I have spent 30 years attacking. On October 12, 2024, I experienced something that has shattered my atheistic worldview and forced me to reconsider everything I thought I understood about reality, death, and the possibility of life after death." He described the incident at Carlo's tomb, acknowledged hearing Carlo's voice, and admitted, "I cannot explain this through natural means. I have consulted with psychologists, neurologists, and colleagues in philosophy, trying to find alternative explanations. None are satisfactory. The most rational conclusion, as impossible as it seems, is that blessed Carlo Acutis somehow spoke from beyond death, that he knew details about my life and my deceased daughter that he could not have known naturally, and that through him my daughter communicated with me in ways I never thought possible. In December 2024, Ricardo took the extraordinary step of resigning from his professorship at the University of Bologna. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "I can no longer teach philosophy of religion from an atheistic perspective, when I have personally experienced something that contradicts atheistic materialism. My intellectual integrity requires I either find new explanations for what happened to me or accept that my previous framework was inadequate." He began what he described as a theological re-education, reading scripture seriously for the first time since his youth, studying Catholic theology, meeting with priests and theologians, and most importantly, talking with other bereaved parents who had maintained faith through loss. In February 2025, Ricardo was received into full communion with the Catholic Church through the sacrament of confirmation. He had been baptized as an infant but never confirmed. He chose Maria as his confirmation name in honor of his daughter. And in April 2025, he gave his first public presentation as a believer rather than a skeptic. From atheism to faith, how blessed Carlo Acutis healed my revolt against God. The presentation was given at the Pontifical University in Rome and attracted over 1,500 attendees, scholars, clergy, journalists, and bereaved parents. In that presentation, Ricardo did something remarkable. He took every argument he had used against religious belief over 30 years and systematically showed how those arguments were actually expressions of unprocessed grief and rage rather than objective intellectual analysis. "I claimed I rejected God because of the problem of evil," he explained. "But that was dishonest. I rejected God because I blamed him for my daughter's death. If I had honestly believed God didn't exist, I wouldn't have spent 30 years arguing against him. You don't argue against something you genuinely believe is imaginary. My atheism was really a 30-year argument with a God I was furious at, but couldn't admit I still believed in." He continued, "I claimed religious belief was psychological compensation for mortality anxiety, but actually, my atheism was psychological defense against grief too painful to process. I constructed an entire intellectual framework to justify not dealing with Maria's death in healthy ways. Carlo Acutis exposed that defense and forced me to finally grieve properly, which paradoxically opened the possibility of faith rather than closing it. Since his conversion, Ricardo has become one of the most effective evangelists to skeptical intellectuals I have ever encountered. His academic credentials, his former atheism, and most importantly, his honest acknowledgement of how his intellectual arguments were actually expressions of grief give him credibility with audiences that would dismiss traditional apologists. He has spoken at over 50 universities across Europe, sharing his testimony and engaging skeptical professors and students in dialogue. He estimates that his presentations have contributed to at least 300 conversions or serious reconsiderations of faith among academics who had previously dismissed Christianity. He has also developed a ministry to bereaved parents who have lost children, something he is uniquely qualified to do given his own experience. He facilitates support groups where grieving parents can process loss without being told they need to get over it or move on, while also showing that grief and faith can coexist, that tragedy doesn't require abandoning God, that wounds can be transformed into sources of compassion. And perhaps most movingly, Ricardo has developed a close relationship with me and my husband Andrea. We speak regularly, share meals when he visits Milan, and collaborate on projects related to Carlo's cause. The man who came to destroy my reputation has become a dear friend and powerful advocate for my son's sanctity. For me personally, the incident of October 12th, 2024, transformed not just Ricardo, but my own understanding of my vocation as Carlo's mother. Before that day, I carried unspoken doubts about whether I was exploiting Carlo's memory, whether my devotion was authentic or pathological, whether the most loving thing I could do would be to step back and let his cause proceed without maternal involvement. Ricardo's attack brought all those doubts into excruciating clarity. For approximately 30 minutes, I genuinely questioned whether I should withdraw completely from public ministry related to Carlo. But then Carlo himself intervened, speaking from heaven, defending me in ways I couldn't defend myself, and simultaneously exposing how the attack against me was really an attack displaced from the attacker's unhealed wounds. That intervention taught me several things. First, that when I cannot defend myself, God will defend me, not necessarily by silencing critics, but by transforming them through truths they cannot ignore. Second, that the attacks against me often reveal more about the attacker than about me. Ricardo's accusations weren't really about my exploitation of Carlo. They were about his inability to process Maria's death in healthy ways. Third, I'm toast. That my vocation is authentic even when I doubt it. Carlo could have simply defended me and silenced Ricardo. Instead, he used the attack as an opportunity to heal Ricardo, to transform an enemy into an advocate, to demonstrate that God's mercy reaches even those whose wounds have hardened into rage. Fourth, that I don't need to be perfect to be faithful. I do have doubts. I do sometimes wonder if I'm doing the right thing. I do struggle with the weight of being blessed Carlo's mother. But those struggles don't disqualify me from serving. They simply make me human, and God uses human instruments even in their weakness. 6 months after his conversion, Ricardo wrote a follow-up article that was published in the same secular journal where his original attack had appeared. This time the title was, "I Was Wrong About Antonia Salzano, a Public Retraction and Apology." The article meticulously addressed every accusation he had made in his original piece. On exploitation. I claimed Signora Salzano profited from Carlo's death. This was factually false. Investigation of her finances shows she has refused millions in commercial opportunities and lives modestly. But more importantly, even if she had accepted payment for speaking, that wouldn't constitute exploitation. It would be reasonable compensation for sharing valuable testimony. My accusation revealed my own inability to imagine that someone could speak about their deceased child without it being pathological. On psychological pathology. I claimed her devotion to Carlo's memory was compensatory delusion. This was psychological projection. My own inability to process my daughter's death in healthy ways made me interpret her healthy processing as pathological. When someone heals in ways we cannot heal, we often accuse them of delusion to avoid confronting our own brokenness. On motivation, I claimed she was building a career as Blessed Carlo's mother. This was cynical misinterpretation of genuine maternal love and authentic spiritual mission. She shares Carlo's story because his life genuinely transformed hers, and because she has witnessed his example transform thousands of others. That's not exploitation, that's evangelization. The article concluded, I owe Signora Salzano not just apology but gratitude. Her graciousness in forgiving me when I had attacked her so viciously, her willingness to walk with me through my conversion process, and her continued ministry despite the pain my accusations caused. All of this demonstrates the authenticity of her devotion and the fruit of Carlo's influence in her life. She is exactly what a saint's mother should be, someone who points not to herself, but to her son, and through her son, to God. And if this channel has been an answer for you, consider leaving a super thanks. This financial help, however small it may seem, sustains this mission and allows us to continue bringing deep and transformative content to more lives that need this word. My name is Antonia Salzano. I am 54 years old, and I am the mother of Blessed Carlo Acutis, who died on October 12, 2006, at age 15, and was beatified on October 10, 2020. On October 12, 2024, exactly 18 years after Carlo's death, I experienced the most humiliating moment of my life when a prominent atheist professor publicly accused me of exploiting my son's memory, attacking me with accusations that touched my deepest fears and doubts. And then Carlo himself spoke from heaven, his voice audible to hundreds of witnesses, defending me in ways I couldn't defend myself, while simultaneously exposing and healing the wound driving my attacker's rage. That attack transformed my greatest enemy into one of my closest allies, converted one of Italy's most influential atheist intellectuals into a powerful evangelist, and taught me that God uses even the cruelest attacks to manifest His glory through the intercession of saints. Riccardo Martelli came to destroy Carlo's reputation and mine. Instead, Carlo destroyed Riccardo's defenses, healed his 29-year-old wound, and transformed him into a witness whose testimony reaches audiences that would never listen to traditional believers. This is my testimony. This is how my worst day as Carlo's mother became the most powerful demonstration of his continuing intercession. This is how an atheist's attack became a saint's opportunity to manifest divine mercy. Carlo taught me that the saints don't just passively pray for us from heaven. They actively intervene. They speak when necessary. They defend those who cannot defend themselves. And they transform attacks into testimonies that glorify God in ways no human strategy could accomplish.